Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Eric Fisk. I'm a professor of political science and government, and this is video 3 of my disturbing trends in American election and politics, I guess you could call it. And I'll apologize. I thought that I could keep these videos to around 5 minutes, but let's say 10 minutes or under. So hopefully you can grab a cup of coffee and hang in with me through some of these videos. But the last video we talked a little bit about this concept called the Overton window, which is just sort of a shortcut of a way for us to sort of better understand the range of possibly acceptable policy solutions or laws that people could pass in a country, and what policies are considered sort of outside of that, extreme or radical or unthinkable. And so this video I want to jump into a little bit sort of what are the more extreme policies, and sort of the idea of fascism, because this is a term that's thrown around a lot, and I think most of us don't actually know what it means, right? And at this point, you're too afraid to ask. So I want to talk a little bit about fascism because I think it's important to sort of all get on the same page as far as the definition before we actually have a conversation about it. But first, I have seen a lot of people trying to compare America today, 2024, with Germany early 1930s, right? And I don't think that's an accurate comparison. And for a couple of reasons. I think, at that time, Germany was a fledgling democracy. They'd only been a democracy for like 15 years or something like that. We've been a democracy for like 200 years, over 200 years. At the time, it was the Great Depression, right? Germany was still paying back. Their economy was already in shambles, paying back reparations for World War I, and then the Great Depression hit. Our economy is not in a Great Depression. There are some serious issues for a lot of people in the economy, but it is not. It is a generally healthy economy. We're not in a depression or anything like that. But I think what might be a little bit more concerning is sort of the process by which the circumstances, right? Because there's a certain dictator that got into power in the 1930s in Germany. I don't want to say the name because I don't want to get filtered by the algorithm. That he was appointed, he was popular, but he got appointed, right? But what is concerning for political scientists, I think, is that it looks like we are actively choosing and electing stuff like this while we're living in a generally stable democracy and more or less economic, solid economic situation. So first of all, let's quick definition. What are we talking about when we talk about fascism? There's a lot of different ways of hashing this out. There might be different definitions if you Google it, but generally how I see fascism as an ideology, like belief system, has a couple kind of core beliefs. Number one, this sort of like reverence for power and authority figures, right? Like this person is up here and like you respect them, they can do no wrong. And it's usually bolstered by a really twisted and extreme nationalism. Depending on the country, it's usually injected with some sort of ethnic, religious belief or something like that. That kind of nationalism, not just sort of like pride in your country, but like we're better than everybody else, and there's a particular kind of person who's the real person in that country, American or German or whoever it might be. To sort of win people over, a lot of times the idea is that there's like this community that's been forgotten about, or the past that's been forgotten about, that if we just bring that back, right, things would be so much better, right? There's just it used to be so good here or at this particular time in history, or maybe a vague time that actually it never existed, right? But they use that as sort of a way of like, oh yeah, remember when things used to be so great? They never were, but that's what the mythical past. And then also just sort of a general like rejection of the democratic process. Like it's not about playing by the rules, it's about winning, right? About taking power and keeping power by any means necessary. And so this is where I sort of see how some rhetoric, language, words that once should have been fringe and radical and unthinkable is now falling within inside that Overton window, right? So you see people being labeled as enemies, right? You're not just my opponent, you're my enemy, right? You have certain groups in America being labeled as vermin, right? That they're tainting the blood of Americans. These are very like 1930s fascist rhetoric, right? And then they have policy proposals that are in that realm as well. So the idea of like not just sort of restrictive border, but actually like internment camps to deport 11 million people, right? Militarizing the border, using the justice system not as an impartial arbiter of, the law, but as a way of going after your political opponents, who are no longer just opponents but your enemies. Limiting free speech, right? You don't want anybody to be critical of the person in power, whoever that might be, and so limitations on the press, limitations on free speech, quelling protests and social movements that are normally within the rights of your particular constitution. All of these things are very, very strongly reflecting authoritarian and fascist tendencies. And so on some level, you can kind of see why this is happening, because in our country, there is, rightly so, a lot of economic concerns about changes in our society, about loss of manufacturing, about growing inequality, about basically rising costs of housing and food. And I mean, basically, there are a plethora of economic issues that the average American is feeling and sort of want somebody to fix because things are getting harder for them. Yeah, the economy, sort of macro level, is doing well, but like a lot of us don't feel like it's doing well, right? And some of that is just our feels, but a lot of that is true. And so actually, this is one of the arguments that you'll hear. I said this is not a post-mortem on 2024 election, but this is one of the arguments you'll hear, is that Democrats just need to win back voters by making a more direct economic appeal to them. But I think even that is a little bit too reductionist, because it kind of ignores the second part, which is sort of the cultural backlash, right? And it's hard to argue. The evidence is overwhelming that American society has some deeply rooted issues in racism and sexism, and a lot of these sort of culture war issues Republicans have latched onto as a way of winning elections and sort of convincing people that that mythical past that used to exist, right, is they're losing it and we need to get it back, and it's because of that, it's because of that, it's because of these culture war issues. And that fear of losing your way of life is really resonating with a lot of people when it's combined with the economic insecurity that a lot of us are feeling. And so this is why I think from the understanding of like fascism, what's concerning for us is not just the rhetoric, but also the policies and the acceptance of it by a large chunk of the population. And again, this is not new. I think political scientists have been trying to figure this out since Donald Trump first appeared on the scene in 2016. But I think a lot of us were wondering, would this be just sort of a blip, a flash in the pan, like, oh, this was the Trump era, right? And then they sort of went back to sort of traditional conservative beliefs of fiscal conservative policies, balanced budget, low taxes, and government staying out of people's business, that kind of stuff. But I think that the 2024 election really proved that, and I can say with fairly good confidence, that this is the new normal. And so what does that actually mean for America in the short term and the long term? Like, are we going to descend into fascism in the next 4 years? Let's take a look at that in the next two videos. So I'll see you there.